Hello everyone, this is going to be my first competitive talk video about a game that is not Splatoon 3. This is going to be my very first time trying this, and I don't know how this will go, but if you like it, make sure to like and subscribe for future videos, and let's go ahead and talk about which weapons are the best and worst for the finals. Starting off with a very pathetic pick from D tier, we have Riot Shield, because it is very limited. Now the only reason I'm saying this is because yes, the other melee weapons for other classes are good, but because they actually have purposes to use them. Like, for example, like you can't reach someone if they're running away, right? So, for this reason, you would have light with stun gun and heavy with the new winch claw as of season 3. But medium doesn't really have anything. I suppose you could try and chase them with a jump pad or a zipline, but other than that, they could just keep running. And yes, the dual blades are also a medium melee weapon, but you can deflect damage, which is actually very helpful in some situations. And that's the only reason I'm putting Riot Shield in D tier, for its outclassed capabilities and pathetic teamfight capability. Next up, another melee weapon, being the dagger. Now, if you're running the dagger, you're running it with invis, and invis is really not good right now. For example, you can hear an invis user coming, and the ripples they put in there are just enough for enemies to see you, and it's just another pain in the butt to get behind them for a backstep, especially when it can't one-shot heavies. So, the limited range and utility that this weapon has is not really helpful in most situations because you're going to end up dying before trading anyone out due to the difficulty of the backstep. And yeah, it's unfortunate. This weapon looked really cool. Thank God we only have 2 weapons in D tier, because next up is the MGL-32. I'm gonna go ahead and say that C tier isn't really all that bad. The only garbage picks are D tier, and everything else is good. And these tiers are just based on how limited they are, how much weaknesses they have, and how well they pair with your loadout. So don't take too much offense when I put one of your favorite weapons in a lower tier. Anyways, the MGL-32 would be like top tier if its grenades would explode on contact, which is one of the reasons I'm putting it in C tier. Yes, it is really good at getting a lot of damage, especially on power shift where everyone is at close quarters. It can defend itself by bouncing its grenades, however, with the slowest class, being the heavy, having this weapon, I'm not sure that this weapon can really thrive in most environments. However, it is out of D tier due to its meta factor in power shift, and this weapon is cool. It's just limited by its not exploding on contact weakness. Moving on, some people may be upset at this, but yes, I'm putting the Model 1887, also known as the Get Off My Lawn gun, in C tier. Now, this weapon isn't bad by any means. Its damage is amazing. It actually has decent long-range pressure considering it's a shotgun, which is strange. But there's one massive weakness that puts this in C tier, and that's the reload speed. In pretty much every teamfight, if you run out of ammo, you are screwed. This takes more than 4 seconds to reload fully, and you are super vulnerable to things like aggressive lights, explosives, and other hazards during this time. So, after one clip is empty, you're basically no use to your team anymore, and unless they want to buff the reload speed to be better, this weapon will still be mid. I really wanted this weapon to be a little bit more, but yeah, the M93R definitely goes in C. Now this weapon still is really cool, it just has 3 main factors that make it annoying to play. One is the iron sights aren't really the best. They're kind of limited due to the fact that you can't really see where the bullets are going to spread. 2, the clip size is just really not enough to be able to do a lot of damage to most of the classes. And 3, the damage. You're not going to be able to finish most people off unless they're already chip damaged to the point where they're about to die, and you can't really start fights and win them because this weapon does not have enough damage. And I suppose you could hit some headshots, but even those are really hard with the iron sights this thing has. So yeah, this is definitely going to stay in C. It is still fun to play sometimes, it's just really not powerful enough to take down most of the classes in this meta right now. For the last pick in C tier, the flamethrower, like it's not even a question. The flamethrower is just very limited. It can be good at clearing gas for teammates to go through flanks and hold choke points. And yes, it is good at area control and DPS, but the afterburn plus the flamethrower damage in the first place, it's not really enough damage to be able to do anything helpful, especially considering most of the time you're fighting mediums and heavies. So, yeah, the flamethrower right now is just like not something you want to pick over like a gun or something, due to the fact that its damage may not be most helpful in most situations. Moving on to B tier, this weapon surprisingly dropped off a lot, being the Lewis gun in B tier. This weapon used to be top tier at the beginning of the game due to its really good damage. It had amazing range and a easily controllable recoil pattern, but over the course of 2 seasons, they've nerfed all that. It got less damage, more recoil, less accuracy, and I think that we'll cover this later, but the M60 outclasses this now, so this is one of the main reasons Lewis gun drops down to B tier. And yeah, it's kind of a disappointment how early game meta has just dropped off, considering how many seasons we've had. Next up, with a weapon I really like, it's the CL40, one of my favorite weapons. Now, I know I should be biased in putting it in A tier, but one really bad balance change happened this season. They nerfed the damage of the CL40 by 20, which has drastically reduced its capability at damaging heavies, destroying lights, and maybe even killing some mediums. And the only reason it can't be top tier is because the self-damage. Like, I hate the self-damage. Every time someone gets close to you, you just can't really fight that because you're damaging yourself, giving them the advantage, and therefore increasing your chances of dying in that fight, which is one of the most annoying factors of it. So overall, this weapon is really fun to play, it's just limited by a few stupid weaknesses at this point. I'm going to go ahead and keep it short for both the Sphere and the Sledgehammer because they're basically the same package with slightly different weaknesses. Now the thing with the Spear and Sledgehammer is that they have like an inverse relationship where one is fast and does less damage, and the other one is slow but does more damage. However, they each have a unique alt fire that does have some usage, but in general is just kind of weak. Like the Sledgehammer, it can create openings and walls for your teammates to use, can drop a cash out down, but other than that, people just use it to do more damage. And the Spear hitbox doesn't even work, but hey, both of these still have a good, decent damage, and with the new Winch Claw, they're a lot better in this meta, so I'll give them that. Probably one of the most underrated picks right now, I'm going to put the SH1900 in B tier. Yes, it may only have 2 shots in the chamber at a time, but these shots do a lot of damage. A full scatter can leave a medium at like 75 health and kill a light, and you have 2 of them. So it's underrated for its damage output due to the fact that you do have to aim to get this maximum damage. But it's a pretty good pick, and I'd say it's underrated overall. Now, next up, we have a little bit of an undertuned weapon that I like to call the Sledgehammer Gun, or the KS-23. Now, I call it the Sledgehammer Gun because, unlike the Sledgehammer, it's able to breach through using its range rather than getting up close and smashing through a wall. And this is really helpful because you can bring down a cash out in suspended structures or create flanks for your team and still be able to fight other long-range threats. And yeah, the only main weakness I'd say this thing has is the reload speed, which is probably why it is an S or A tier. For our last pick in the B tier, we have the R357. You may be thinking, this is a well-balanced handgun with high damage, good accuracy, and decent teamfighting capabilities. But why would it not be an A or S tier? Because it leaves people at 1 health. Like most of the weapons designed in this game, this weapon is probably hurt the most by this factor due to its slower fire rate, smaller clip size, and increase in aim dependency than other weapons. It's still a good package if you can figure out how to one-trick this weapon in some way, but this weakness is just a little bit too much and devastates the weapon in some cases. Moving on from the B tier, I'm going to go ahead and get the throwing knives out of the way first. I probably would have put this in B tier if they did not fix the projectile speed this season. It is much better to hit your shots, it is way easier to aim, and with the amount of damage this weapon has, it's solid. Oh yeah, and it has unlimited ammo, so this is a really, really annoying weapon if played correctly, and it will continue to be so as long as they keep giving it generous buffs. Now, I've grown to like this next weapon a lot recently, and yeah, it's the sword. Now, this thing may leave people at one shot, kind of like the revolver and most other weapons in this game, but the fact that you're a melee weapon means you're close enough to quick melee him and kill him. So the combos this weapon has with itself are pretty amazing, and it can be run with almost any build on light as long as you're helpful to the team in sorts. But yeah, it's a high damage weapon with super good mobility, and it combos off itself a lot. So yeah, it's probably one of my favorites. Now I know a lot of people don't like this weapon, but I've got to give it to the sniper, going in A tier. The sniper rifle is probably the best gun at dealing with long-range threats, obviously. However, it is not S tier because it is still very vulnerable up close. Yes, you can hipfire and melee, but the hipfire is very inconsistent, and yeah, you'd have to melee to finish them off. But aside from that, this is really good at shooting people from long distances, and based on how annoying it is, definitely A tier. Very similar to the sniper, I'm gonna go ahead and put the recurve bow in A tier. Now the bow in this case is a lot like the sniper, but you have an actual good hipfire and a charge time, which is actually really good in most cases. It also has infinite ammo, and the only weakness I'd say that this thing has is that the projectile speed is not that of the sniper. But this is definitely a much better option for closer mid-range fights than the sniper currently is. I used to like this weapon a lot, but it's still pretty good with the burst shotgun in the heavy class. The burst shotgun is really good at stalling with long range options. You can hold up a mesh shield, place a dome shield, and they'll have to get close to you for them to be able to do anything, and that's when you just spray them. Yes, it is a little inconsistent, but due to the fact that this has a whopping 16 shot per clip, this weapon can be unstoppable at close range fights. Now on debut, this weapon was really good, and I'd say it still is with the dual blades in A tier. Now, I have a lot to say about the dual blades. Yes, it is a medium melee weapon, so you won't have as much opportunity to chase the enemy down, but you can deflect damage and still damage them from a distance, even though it's a melee weapon. And this weapon functions pretty good in all the roles medium wants to play. It can be aggressive, it can be supportive and stall, and it can even just chip damage at some point. So this package is pretty amazing overall, with some of the greatest defense this class has ever seen. And next up, for our last pick in A tier, the M60 being much better than it was in the base game. The M60 has gotten a lot done to it. They buffed its recoil to make it easier to control. It's gotten a lot better damage. It's been a powerhouse at chip damage, and it's been underrated so far. I really hope it will see some usage, and yeah, it's a solid package right now. It's just people don't realize that the buffs have changed it drastically. Now we're moving on to the S tier, and let's start with a weapon that's been a support powerhouse for basically the entire game, with the AKM. To start off, AKM has a very generous 36 clip size. With a decent amount of damage per each bullet, you can be a chip damage factory to your teammates. This, paired with Healing Beam, is pretty much one of the most supportive weapons out there. It's good at taking fights, it's good at dealing damage, and it's just good overall. I don't really have anything else to say about this. The AKM will probably be meta forever, basically. Oh, and while we're talking about meta since base game, we can't forget about the M11. probably having the highest DPS in the game. I don't know where to start with the M11. It has the highest fire rate in the game with decent damage bullets and a large clip. It's really good at dealing damage, which is the role that light suits. It's good with anything that the light wants to run, and it's flexible, which is one of the reasons like people like this weapon, why it's so good, and how it's able to fit into so many casual or even competitive light builds. Again, like the AKM, this is probably going to be meta forever. This next weapon I don't really like that much due to how the devs failed to realize it was so good, but the FCAR probably being the most overtuned weapon in the game. The FCAR's had a lot done about it. First they nerfed the recoil, first they nerfed the damage, but it's still overtuned. Because it does more than 20 damage a shot with 25 bullets in the clip. It can melt anything that approaches it. It's a really flawed weapon that's still amazing in team fights, but it's good to the point where it's broken, and unfortunately it's going to stay this way until the devs do something about it. On the brighter side, let's go ahead and talk about the XP for a little bit. Similar to the M11, the XP has a really high damage per second, but the only thing making it different is because it has an actual iron sight and really good long range pressure for some reason. The only downside to this package is that it has a limited clip size, and when you're in a team fight, constantly reloading is going to drag you down a little bit. Again, it is a close match between the XP and the M11 for the best light SMG there is, but for now, I'm going to give the XP the edge. I think I'd consider this a higher fire rate weapon because of the mass fire rate it has, but the V9S is also an S tier. The V9S is only in this tier solely because of its fire rate. Due to the fact of it being a semi-auto, it is assigned with a good damage capability of a normal pistol, but this might be a little too much considering how fast it can fire and how consistently accurate it is. This is a really good weapon at dealing damage to all types of classes, not just lights, because of how weak they are. But it's also very helpful at getting quick picks. So yeah, this is another really good weapon, and surprisingly underrated. Arguably one of the highest risers in this tier, rising from C, I'd put the FAMAS in S. The FAMAS used to be not great, I'll say it like that. Its recoil was like uncontrollable, and the reward you got was just a staggered fire rate with barely any damage. But they fixed both of those attributes this season, making the recoil much easier to control and giving it slightly more damage, so you're not going to be leaving most classes at one shot. And yeah, it's a very harsh competition between the AKM and the FAMAS, of which is the better supportive package for chip damage. And I'd say you could pick both, because they're both pretty balanced in the factor that medium wants to play. And overall, it's just solid right now. I'm glad the devs decided to fix this weapon. And finally, we have the LH1 in S tier. The LH1 has, I'm just gonna say, it's been broken since Season 1. It's had amazing damage, an amazing fire rate, a generous clip size of 15 for crying out loud. And I'm pretty sure the only downside of this weapon is that the iron sights are probably the worst in the game, but other than that, this thing can destroy anything. Yes, it does have the attribute of leaving people at 1 health, but with the fire rate this thing has, it's not going to really be a problem in most fights, and overall this weapon is just a threat to most classes, and it will probably continue to be so unless this weapon gets fixed. So yeah, after ranking all the weapons in the game right now, this is my final tier list. If you liked my opinion and would like to see more videos, be sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you guys next time.